But as a fireman, especially with a wildland fire, I'm listening to that radio, and as soon as the tones go out and we pop a brush fire or we pop a structure fire, it's all in. I want to be the first one there. I want to be the first in the door. I want to experience getting in, taking the heat, looking for whether there's victims or looking for the seat of the fire. You just It's just a thing. Now it's not the popular thing because why would we want someone's house to catch fire? Why would we hope for chaos? We're there just in the event something happens.
Okay, can you introduce yourself for me, please?
My name's Alan Perry. I am the Deputy Chief of Fire Prevention, Caldwell Fire Department.
And Alan, can you give me a little bit of background about where you grew up, schooling, what kind of kid you were, stuff like that?
Sure. So my dad was a coastie. So I was born in North Carolina, and for a couple of years we moved around quite a bit. He was assigned to helicopter rescue, so we lived in Alaska, Hawaii, and North Carolina where we started. Um, Early on, they had separated, and my mom and I had moved to Chatsworth, California, which is in the LA area. And from that point, we eventually moved into Ventura County, which is a small town called Simi Valley. Yeah, from there, just went to school, elementary school, high school. Nothing really stood out. I had a buddy who, after high school, would go to LA City Fire, and he was a fire explorer, and so he wasn't available to hang out on Tuesday and Thursday nights, and sometimes Saturday, and I didn't understand why. I was an art major, and all my friends were very eclectic. I had friends with everybody that did all sorts of things, from the kids that did sports to the kids that were in art, the kids that were popular, the kids that weren't. I just kind of very medium, run of the mill person. And then one night we were gonna hang out, and he said, "Hey, why don't you come with me to this Explorer program? Want to hang out at a fire station?" He said, "Yeah, it's awesome. Let's go." So I went with him, and that was the beginning of the end. We That night, I think there was a group of 12 or 13 students that showed up, all ages from, I think, the youngest somewhere around 16 to the oldest 20 or so, and we were just going over how roof operations work on the chainsaw. And the mentor at the time was just taking us through how you clean it, how you use it, um, and it really was nothing other than learning how to use a chainsaw. And half of them were in some uniform, and the other half were standing there. This is before cell phones, so they had full attention, right? So um, I thought, well, that was kind of cool. I'd never really messed with a chainsaw before, and the stories and the people coming through the station were amazing because it was just a culture that I hadn't been involved with before. And so after that night, he said, "Hey, you want to come back next week?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, I could do that." And so I kind of started making it a regular thing until somehow accidentally I got signed up, and I was coming on my own. And then we were able to go on runs, set up and go on runs with them. So I'd ride the ambulance, or I'd ride the engine just as someone who got to sit in the back and participate as a viewer, and every now and then get to do something cool. So I was doing that just on the side, just something to do on some of the weekends and the evenings, and I still wasn't all in. It was just exciting. And then Oxnard College, which is in Camarillo, California, started a fire science program. It was their first year. So my friends that I had made were all chatting it up. We should all go sign up. So I went with them and signed up and took EMT and a couple other baseline fire science classes. Still, no intention of being a firefighter. This was just something to do. I was an art major. At the time, I was going to Art Center Pasadena, and I was working on scholarships to Cal Arts Valencia, which are pretty highly accredited art colleges. And I was doing this on the side. I started taking EMT, and then Oxnard announced they were going to have their very first fire academy. So it's a college-based fire academy. It wasn't job placement, but it was, here's everything you need to know. When you graduate from here, you'll have your firefighter one, you'll have a certificate confined space, wildland, X, Y, and Z, all these different things. Well, that sounds cool. So I put my application in for that. And I ended up as a auxiliary. I didn't make the full class. And then I guess 3 or 4 people dropped out, and they gave me a call and said, "You start tomorrow." And panic set in because I didn't really know what I was getting into. I was working at the time as a camp counselor at the YMCA. I had done that for years. And so I basically said, "Hey, I don't think I can work anymore. I've got to do this full time." I had a girlfriend of several years, and I said, "I'm going to try this." She's like, "Yeah, okay, let's go for it." So I quit my job.
How old were you?
I was 18, going on to 19.
And when you talk about initially going out, your friend says, "Hey, why don't you come and do this?" How old were you at that point?
I was probably 16 going on 17,
Okay.
right in there. So I had been doing this for a little while, but again, it was a pastime, like you would go play soccer, go paintball, go something with buddies. It wasn't anything serious. It was exciting, but I never had conversations with anybody about this is something you should pursue. This is a possible career. It just didn't dawn on me. Um, I'm not the most athletic. I'm certainly not the tallest. I never really even put much thought into it. So anyway, show up at the academy, and I think there's 20 or so of us, and it's pro-military, regimented, shock to the system, shining boots, standing at attention, learning all of these things out of the blue. So the learning curve was high. It was steep, but it was amazing. It was structure, and I loved structure, so I was all in. Went through the academy, graduated at the end, and still kind of like not really sure what I'm going to do now. I really liked hazardous materials portion of the class. I really loved the fire investigation portion. We got to do some live fire training at this old hospital, this abandoned hospital, which I thought was amazing. But nearing the end of class, because we were finishing up through December, they had us fill out applications for the Forest Service, and then I think City of Chino at the time was hiring, so a bunch of us like filled out apps and went and spent the night in the park with 500 people in line to be able to give our app. Just crazy stuff that again I just was going with the flow of this peer group that I had kind of fell in with. Forest Service called early that year, early the following year, 97 I think. And they said, "Hey, can you be here in a week?" And it was the Klamath National Forest, which is Northern California. It's about 16 hours away. So again, it was talk to the steady girlfriend, quit the job, drive up there, and now I'm in a whole new world. Northern California was very different. I was in a barracks. There was just me and then the salty long-term guy who kind of lived there but shouldn't. And I was on an engine company for the Forest Service, which was a real blast and a culture shock. Northern California was a little different at the time. And we also served 2 reservations that were right there, which for me, I'm thinking I'm a fireman. Hey, everybody. But the Forest Service wasn't necessarily well liked on the res and some of those areas up north because of history. And so I remember we were doing this parade down the main road. It was Ishy Pishy Road. And it was just a bunch of us, and the Forest Service truck was in it. And I'm sitting on the captain's spot, and he was sitting in the back doing something. And I start to roll down the window to wave at kids or whatever. He's like, "Roll that window up right now. You're going to hit with a rock." I had no idea what he was talking about. Well, not everybody loved the Forest Service. So there was a culture shock of me going through this academy, being lifted up. You're the best. You're the greatest. Everybody loves a fireman. To being humbled very quickly, realizing that the community we served wasn't exactly a fan, and that I shouldn't go out at night if when I'm off duty, and I should pretty much stay near the barracks.
What was the history that?
So the Forest Service, and this is a terrible memory, but the Forest Service in the local area just over land and over sacred grounds and the commission of those or the taking of those through the U.S. government. Just that whole area had a really rich history and either being oppressed or having land taken or issues over burial sites, holy areas. So I don't have all the history on it, but that was the mood or the temperature of the conversation that.
So it was more of a government thing as opposed to a fire department.
Definitely more of a government thing. I'm from the government. I'm here to help kind of thing was not. Was not really meshing well with the locals. So we had. It was a very interesting dynamic. I'd never been in a place like that where, dumb me, just a big old grin on my face, here to help, but not everybody wanted to accept the help. I was the only EMT for like 20 or 30 miles. The Forest Service typically at that time didn't respond to medical emergencies, but we ended up going to the res twice in my time there, which was not normal at all at the time, and pretty hostile. Again, with a 30 to 40 minute response time, they didn't turn out to be viable responses, which just increased some of the hostility that you experience when you get there. So it was a very different time. I learned a lot, but again, a steep curve on how to interact with people, how to deal with adversity and really not know why. So it was an interesting time. It was great growth. But the Forest Service I loved it. I got to experience going out on campaign fires, which is they basically took several crew members off their apparatus, their engines, put us all together on hand lines, about 20 or so deep, and then hike up into the wilderness and go put it out with shovels and with clouds and chainsaws, cutting barrier. And again, completely new to me. So it was fantastic. I had a great time.
But before we go on, I have a big question for you. And I've always wondered this because as law enforcement, I never really thought about it a little bit in terms of people shooting at me. Mm-hmm. But I had thought about the fire department, but then there was a big thing, which was the fire part of it. Did you have what was your thought on that? Because it's like, I have no problem running into a house and doing a search warrant and everything else, but it's a totally different thing running into a building that's burning.
Yeah, I would guess if you were to ask the majority of first responders where they fall in that, officers or police officers or peace officers who are drawn to that feel the same as you. Yeah, it's just part of the job. It's exciting parts, right? Like, it's hopefully controlled chaos, and you kind of hope for the chaos because it's exciting, and that's part of the job you want to do. And you know that there's the potential for catastrophic events to take place. But as a fireman, especially with a wildland fire, I'm listening to that radio, and as soon as the tones go out and we pop a brush fire or we pop a structure fire, it's all in. I want to be the first one there. I want to be the first in the door. I want to experience getting in, taking the heat, looking for whether there's victims or looking for the seat of the fire. It's just a thing. Now, it's not the popular thing, because why would we want someone's house to catch fire? Why would we hope for chaos? We're there just in the event something happens. But to be totally honest, as a working for the Forest Service, when we get that call, being hurt was never on my mind. Not a once. I had the skill set, I had the equipment, I had a team, and I was probably just young and dumb, and I never even considered the totality of the consequences that could occur.
What's interesting is you're describing when you say, hey, I wanted to be the first in the door. I think that's certainly me, and that's a lot of the friends that I have. I want to be the first in the door for a search warrant. But when I think about you, I want to be the first in the door, and then I think about heat and getting burned and everything else. that's just part of the job for you?
I think it's just part of the job. Whereas I would never want to go on a DV call because of the unknowns. Yeah, I have a sidearm. Yeah, I've got some protection here. You know, please don't shoot me in the face. You know, that's a risk we're willing to take. That kind of thing. I would. My son's a peace officer for Boise PD. My son-in-law, and I worry about him, which is funny because I worry about the job that he does. I have friends that worked for ICE. I have other friends in law enforcement, and I do worry about that aspect because it's changed so much over the years. Personally, for my crew, I worry about my crews. I've never worried about myself, and I think that's very atypical of our line of work. In the sense that I know what my capabilities are, and I know hopefully what my team, but they're my priority. I'm going to go in, make educated decisions. I'm excited to get in there because I want to tell the story. I want to feel it. I want to see it. I want to experience it. Um, but at the same time, there's a huge part, which doesn't make any sense, that you are overly cautious about everybody else. And I think that's just the nature of first responders in general. Even if you run an ambulance or you are in the ER, you know, doctors and nurses who are in the ER, they're not there because they want a light, easy day. They're there because they like the constant flow, the challenge of a new environment. Fire and police are very much the same way. It's just we're dealing with different aspects of that. Um, but again, going back to how I ended up in it, it's like falling forward. I never imagined it. I just kept falling into circumstances that allowed me to advance. And when I got to the Forest Service and I experienced this, it was like, what's next? What can I do now? Because the Forest Service is a seasonal, it's a temporary position. So I was a seasonal firefighter. So I only got 4.5 months if I was lucky. And then it was back to California or back down to home. And what am I going to do? I loved the Forest Service because of being in the wilderness, having the freedom, whether we were cutting fire line or improving hiking grounds or camp trails or on fires. I loved being outside. It was great. But coming back to Southern California, when they have a test for 5 positions and you have thousands of applicants, is a very, very competitive field. And you have to have something special, and you get wrapped up in having that special thing. What makes you stand out when it's like day 7, interview 70 of another 2 weeks of interviews? How is your interview going to stand out? What have you done to prepare yourself for this? And so those challenges were almost overwhelming. So I would do interviews, great, but you can easily get lost. Going through it and being in the position I'm in now and for several years, when I do interviews, by the end of the day, unless you're bringing something snappy, I've heard the answers already. I know what you're going to say. Yes, I have a passion for serving the community. Yeah, I know you do. You want to be here, but what else about you? What else, right? So anyway, so going back to Forest Service ends. I had a great time. Went back to I believe I went back to the YMCA as a filler job. And actually, I got a job with Panavision. I was making movie cameras. So I was working in Woodland Hills, and I was working on building movie cameras for almost a year and a half before the next fire opportunity came along. And it was a firefighter position um, for Rocketdyne, which is a local testing laboratory for space shuttle engines. And so I got to work up there for a while. And after that, I got promoted to training lieutenant. So then I was in charge of training for a while. Shortly after that, I think I was there for about 3 years before I got a job with Ventura County. They were looking for fire inspectors. Now, a fire inspector obviously is different than your firefighter. Your firefighter and your operations, they are going to run the engine, run emergencies. Fire inspector is going to be doing all that groundwork before the event happens. So whether it's plan reviews, building construction, fire sprinklers, alarm checks, community involvement, weed abatement, all the risk reduction stuff. So I did that for Ventura for a number of years.
And how was that being an inspector versus being, on the rig?
So not as exciting, clearly, and I was still had that passion. I was still trying to test and get on the apparatus. And in the interim for a while, I was also volunteering or an auxiliary firefighter for the city of Taft, which was about 2.5 hours away. So I was doing that on the weekends and working for Ventura. So I was still kind of fueling a little bit of that desire. But Ventura really was starting to take more of my attention. So I had to stop doing that and really focus on working in the fire prevention area, which is very different because it's not only is it a civilian position versus a safety position, which means you're a different class. I won't say a different class of citizen, but you're a different class operating under the same blanket. You have different job functions. For me personally, that job was very hard. So I'm dyslexic. And so growing up in the early 80s, going to school, that wasn't recognized. And so I always had to do more work than everybody else. I'd have to write reports or do school projects over and over and over until I was sure I got rid of all of the inconsistencies and it made sense. And so that was a real challenge. So then landing in a position where I'm in charge of writing reports and following up on technical reviews, I spent so many hours after and before work making sure that my work was good. That was a real challenge. So it was good. We got to get out in the field. I was still part of the fire department. I learned to identify that the stuff I was doing, the mantra that I took is I'm protecting firefighters by making sure these systems are in place so they're not hurt doing their job, right? And so I was there for a number of years. During that time, my wife and I were in the mix of all of that. My girlfriend at the time with the Forest Service, we got married, had some kids, and we had visited some family in Idaho and fell in love with the place. This was like 2005 or so. I thought, let's just go do that. So I was actively looking for a job in the Boise area. And a position came up for a plan reviewer for the state fire marshal's office. So I tested for that and I got that job. And so the family packed up and we moved within the course of a couple of weeks, bought a house, and we landed in Boise, Idaho. And it really was wonderful. However, we were only there for about 8 months before the family was really feeling the pinch of being alone. And what I mean by is we had 4 kids under 5 years old. I was gone at work all day. And we don't really know anybody except for the one cousin that lived nearby. So my wife was having a real hard time being away from her mom, family. They were very close. And so we just had that conversation about if we're not happy, what are we going to do next? I had called Ventura back. They had filled my job, but my supervisor, or one of the supervisors at the time, was retiring, leaving within 2 weeks. And they said, why don't you just come on back? We'll slide you right across the board. We'll bring you back in with your seniority. It's a done deal. So packed the whole family back up, came back to California with 4 kids, 2 dogs, a wife, and $600 in my pocket.
Are you going back as an inspector at that point then?
Right. So I'm sliding right back in as an inspector.
Okay.
And spent a few more years there. And then over my time there, when I came back, I was moved into the community education division. So basically, I was in charge of the education for schools, private companies. I was teaching first aid CPR. I was teaching fire safety, exit drills in the home, smoke detectors. And then a big part of it, I was eventually overseeing a program called CERT, Community Emergency Response Training. And so it was basically an additional training that we did in the evenings, free to the public. And Ventura has several cities that reside under its blanket, or under its umbrella. And each city had its own program, and these programs were about 6-week programs with kind of a large scale incident for them to use their skills at the end. And so each city did that about 2 to 3 times a year. So I was very busy, mostly prepping during the day and then after hours running these programs, which I loved it. It was great. It was the best part of our community outreach that I could do. I really enjoyed it. So I got to do that for about 3 of the 10 years I was back at Ventura after moving back. And then we got the bug about getting back to Idaho. Like it had always been in the background. The kids were a little older. Things were changing in the state, and we said, "Are we going to try this again?" And so we started having the conversation about going back. And this time, the whole family came with us, so it made the transition a lot easier. I started interviewing. The state fire marshal at that time was looking for a fire investigator, in which I had no experience except for a few classes. Fire investigation was not part of my job as an inspector. That was a line position, a captain's position, currently in Ventura. So there was no way for me to get from A to B in Ventura unless I was able to make it to the line as an entry-level firefighter and work my way up. And even at that, there's only a finite amount of positions, and they're held pretty tight. So it would be a challenge to get there. So I interviewed for this position as a fire investigator, and I had no experience. People that I knew at the time when I had worked there had all gone. Actually, the guy who replaced me when I left the state fire marshal's office is now state fire marshal. So I came back and had this interview with them, and they said, "Well, you have all these other things in your resume. We can teach you to be an investigator. We'll take you." And so I got the job, packed the family back up, shot back off to Idaho. And so for the next 5 years, I was the primary area fire investigator from Riggins to Twin Falls and everything in between. And roughly about 70 or so departments in that span, volunteer, just a few paid departments. And so we would answer the call to any fire that happened where they required an investigator. And if that agency didn't have that skill set, that's where we came in and we would go in.
Okay, I have some questions before you go on.
Sure.
Fire investigator, is that typically a position that you work up through the ranks to get to? Or, well, is that typically a position you work up to get to? Or is your situation kind of unique where, you got to that position without having to do that?
It's a little bit of both. So typically, you would have somebody who has started from the line and worked their way up, and it's often other duties assigned. In some agencies, it's a promotion and a standalone. Some agencies, it's other duties assigned that I am the captain or I'm the engineer, and hey, we need to hang out a while and figure this out because you've taken a class or two and you have the skill set. For the state, it's a civilian position that we oversee fire investigation for the state, but are not part of any agency. So normally, you would promote up because you're going to have a skill set that comes with that promotion, that experience. The other way to get there is through education. So there's a number of classes. There's state certifications you get. So my certification is through the International Association of Fire Investigators, so IAAI. That certification, the certification level is you can get an awareness, which you can get through a federal level certificate, which is X amount of hours. There's several hours of online courses you can take to get you officer level experience. And then there's through the IAAI, there is the FIT, which is kind of your technician. That's exactly what it is. Your first real level of tested and certified. You've been through a certified class. There's expectations that you will know at the end of that course, and then you're tested and you get this FIT certificate. To get the next level, which is the CFI, Certified Fire Investigator, you need 5 years of experience, X amount of hours of training, continued case files, um, and a couple other courses that you need in there. And so, at the end of my 5 years with the state, I then met all the qualifications and got the Certified Fire Investigator.
So, as a certified fire investigator or as a fire investigator, what type of cases are you working on?
Everything. So, state, um, at any level, once you're a fire investigator, you should have the base knowledge to be able to recognize, is this beyond my skills or not, right? So coming up with the state was nice because I had experienced people with me, and we can work through problems. And then, because we're a standalone agency, if I felt that it was criminal or we needed additional help, I could reach out to the local PD or SO for the area. So I go to a fire in Jerome. I'm going to ask for SO or the city to assist if I come across something that might be criminal, or I need to track down VIN numbers or witnesses, follow up information. County areas are the same. And then when I started with the state, ATF is the agency that oversees or is responsible for the primary training and follow up of fire investigations. They have training facilities where it's a warehouse size facility. You can build a house in it or a hotel inside of it, ignite it, and follow the fire patterns to see how a fire is going to react based on the type of paints, the construction, anything you want to test in there. They're amazing facilities. And there's an ATF office in Boise, just a few blocks from the state fire marshal's office. And I started asking questions about why do we not have them as partners. And so, again, being who I am, I walked down the street, knocked on the door, started talking to them, and invited them out to the first couple fires I went to. Started building a relationship, and then they would call me, and I would call them, and we created this really, really positive working relationship where we learned from each other. And to this date, though I've left the state and I've been with Caldwell, as a fire investigator, they're a primary resource for me if I need assistance. What they can offer is beyond showing up to the scene and working an incident scene and having local resources to assist. If it was something that regarded mass amounts of manpower, let's say I had a commercial building or a high fatality issue, or I needed data collection, whether that's sampling or I needed to go talk to witnesses, I can call the ATF office and they can actually they can dispatch their team, and they have specialized units that's truck full of people and equipment and experts in electrical and chemistry, and they all show up and we can work a scene with them. It's almost like investigation in a box, right? I have 15 to 20 people that show up and they're all experts in their field.
Is there a case, are there certain cases that dictate that an ATF is going to take, ATF agent is going to take the case versus a state fire inspector?
Sure. So most likely it's going to start with a state and escalate up, or it's going to start with an AHJ, a local agency, and then escalate up. If it's going to be interstate commerce, if it's going to be hate crime, church, there's a few of those things that are automatic calls to ATF, at least for notification, if not for dispatch and assistance. And I think there's a few other that I don't recall at the time. But yeah, so there's some trigger points that would require them to be involved.
Can you talk a little bit about your relationship with law enforcement when you go out and do these investigations? What typically makes you call or get a local law enforcement or even a federal law enforcement agency involved?
Sure. So when I worked with the state, I had a lot of opportunity to meet law enforcement from all over because I was running through multiple counties. And if I'm being called out to take a look at a fire because they're not sure how it started, I treat every fire like there's the potential that it's a crime. And then I can lessen as I I can kind of stand down as I get more information. So I started a higher what's the right word I'm looking for? I try to treat it as if it's a crime scene every time, so I'm not walking over evidence. I'm not messing things up, and then I'll slowly kind of work my way back depending on the information and the feedback I get. I always try to have law enforcement there, whether it's SO or PD, right off the bat, just to make sure that if there was anything I was missing, if there's any questions I had, and then kind of go from there. Um, if I came across evidence that would start making me think that this could be a potential crime, I'd always stop, kind of freeze where we're at, have everybody stop what they're doing, and then we would call, bring them in, identify what's going on, and then work forward from that point with guidance. Even as a technician that can collect evidence, I'd still want them to be there because I don't have a chain of custody. So if I was to collect the evidence and wrap it up and mark it up, I still don't have anywhere to store it, or I can't do anything with it unless I send it to Porter Lane where the fire debris analysis lab is. But that's typically I would do the chain of custody to PD, and PD would send it off. So I always had them there primarily for that, for the chain of custody, for physical evidence that was taken, and or if I need to track people down, again, VIN numbers, people in the area. And it's easier when cops knock on doors, especially when you're in more rural environments. They would argue and say everybody loves a fireman. I will tell you that's not the case. And I don't have any protection on, so I would prefer that, if we're canvassing a neighborhood, that I have law enforcement assisting.
Well, that's funny because I would assume if you're as a fireman knock on the door, I would think everybody loves you.
Yeah. So maybe in some of the more metropolitan areas, more of the cities, but the further you get away from the main city and the more rural you get, stranger danger is stranger danger. It doesn't matter what you look like. And which was real challenging for the state because we don't wear a uniform, don't have a badge. I'm just a dude in a red truck that pulled up and on your property, which was which had its moments for sure.
Let me ask you this: when through the course of your career as a fire marshal, how often, when you have criminal cases, I don't know how often those go to court. How often have you had to testify in court?
It's a great question. So I've been in several depositions. I'm actually scheduled for court in January for a case that I worked recently in Caldwell. I have not, in my 8 years now, ever once had to go and sit on a stand in an actual courtroom. That's not real normal. My understanding is typical for an investigator to be called a couple times a year based on their caseload. So when I was with the state, we would be lucky to get somewhere around 60 to 70 a year. Now I think they're up to more. With Caldwell, for fire investigations, I'm floating around 40 or so that actually take me going into investigation mode and really doing the full-blown report whole thing. So I think I'm not doing necessarily enough of them to kind of hit that trigger level where I'd be in court enough. However, I was taught, and I have always built my reports with everything in there and very clear and non-scientific language if possible. Because when I hand my report, what I would do is I'd have my wife read the reports and say, you're a member of the jury. Do you understand this? She would say yes or no or ask questions, and I would rework it. So I tried to write all my reports, my primary reports, that anybody be able to read and really understand the basis of what I'm trying to say. If I needed my notes or if I needed to go, then I can talk technical with people who speak technical jargon. That way we can get to the next level if need be. So the couple that depositions I've had, they've been more of that, questions and more technical answering questions versus the report. But I kind of think that my report writing style has ultimately kept me out of courtrooms, to be honest.
So if you don't testify that much, even in these depositions,
Mhm.
if you have a really good report, I'm assuming that it makes you fairly comfortable, but do you still get nervous having to do those type of things?
Yeah, and it might just be me, but I would say that anybody, whether you're experienced or not, if anybody's being questioned about what they've done, um, definitely puts you on edge to some degree. I know it does for me. If I review the report ahead of time, make sure that I remember. I go through my notes if I still have them, go through the photos so I can answer truthful questions. The challenge is that when you are anytime you're on the stand or in a deposition, the Daubert challenge is the first thing that typically comes up, where they want to know your experience and what makes you qualified. And being questioned as to why you're qualified can be unnerving. Um, and then also knowing that any portion of your life they want that cross examination wants to dip into is fair game. So it does get it can be nerve wracking knowing that um, I can be sitting up there and they can ask me questions about, on Facebook, you posted this 2 days before this. What makes you qualified for X? Whatever it might be. Now, I'm the most boring person you've probably ever met, so I'm never worried about that per se. But I am worried about not having the right answer or not being able to articulate myself correctly to where everybody can understand. So, more of that is nerve wracking. But yeah, in-depth review of the report, which you go through it and then you see typos or you see certain things. You go, oh man, I clearly wrote this when I was new because it doesn't quite jive. But yeah, everybody I think gets nervous anytime that they need to testify as to why you're there.
You and I met through a mutual friend, a detective, and wanted to kind of talk about some of the interesting cases that you've worked on as a fellow fire marshal. And, we discussed this a little bit. So, whatever you feel that you can talk about in terms of the current case you're working on, and maybe some other interesting cases that the audience may find interesting.
Sure. So I am working with ISP on a cold case currently based on relationships that I've built when I was at the fire marshal's office. Um, and it is a case that was listed as an accidental death. Um, and once I received the report and I was going through the report and its findings and working with the detective who's not convinced it's an accident, um, we are working through making the necessary changes to have the report reopened, so we can start following up on some of the evidence. The evidence is there, but it doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. And so it's a cold case. And so when you're going back to a case that happened years and years ago, and you're looking at the limited data that you had then with the knowledge, with the scientific and factual knowledge that we have now, you want to build a good case to make sure you can get resolution for whatever it is that we're looking for. And so that's exciting because it's not just the puzzle pieces of an existing fire investigation. When I teach fire investigation, let me just say this. I talk about how fire investigation is like a box of puzzles. It's a 1,000-piece puzzle, and not all the shapes are the same size, same color. It's a mix, and you try to put as many puzzle pieces together that fit to come up with a clear vision and picture of what's taken place. With a cold case, you are limited to a finite amount of pieces of that puzzle. And there really is no way to get new information because people are not around anymore when you're talking about a case that's 20 years old. So going back and knocking on doors to neighbors or going to the stores that used to be there or places where this individual may have ventured, all that data is gone. Those people are in the wind. Those things have changed. So it's a unique challenge, but it's exciting to kind of go through and see what you can come up with. So yeah, I've been working on cold case with ISP, which has been a lot of fun. Kind of rebuilding what had happened back then with the limited amount of knowledge we have. As far as exciting cases, I could probably talk for days on stories. What I've learned quickly is nothing really surprises or shocks me anymore. Um, whether it's tragedy or head scratchers, there's just human nature and the absolute lunacy of some of the things that you come across. It just sometimes you can't even compute. Um, I have a couple cases, but one that stands out that I tell stories about was a fire southern Idaho area. I got called about 3 o'clock in the morning. It was a couple hour drive. Ultimately, what had happened is it was a domestic violence call that happened late the day prior, so around 11 o'clock the prior day, um, with a cheating spouse was kind of the crux of the thing. And then through the evening, the um, female involved with the cheating really started having some crazy behavior, started destroying the house by herself. The male had left and gone to stay somewhere else. The female occupant was destroying her own house, not answering phone calls from the mother. I think there was a history there because the mom was calling local PD to go do a welfare check. PD had showed up somewhere around 3 o'clock in the morning to the facility, and the house was completely dark. Windows were black, couldn't see in. And as the officer was doing a 360, kind of tapping on the windows, trying to get information, he heard the window break at the other end of the house. And as he came around the corner, a female occupant had gotten up from the broken glass and ran off into a field. And so he had chased her down, got more resources there. They had opened the door and smoke was pouring out of the house. So they called local fire. Local fire showed up. They called us. So long story short, they show up, and the house, it was so it's now about 6 a.m. The sun has not come out yet. It's cold, and they're inside the house. The smoke level is just a fog that's just about 2.5 to 3 feet off the ground, and it looks like a horror movie. It's just through the house. And then how the house is destroyed, the living room is essentially melted, but not really burned. The kitchen's destroyed. There's food on the walls. And then the female occupant had written several messages on the walls, some in blood, some in Sharpie, some in crayon, all sorts of different things. So it really was this very eerie, very, very Halloween-esque haunted house walkthrough. And so ultimately, when that clears out, the sun comes up, the temperature changes, that stuff goes away. Ultimately, the female had written notes and suicidal notes on the walls to the boyfriend, to her children, to other people, and then had poured gasoline from one end of the house up to the bedroom where she is staying, lit it, meaning ignited the fuel, she used gas, and then closed her bedroom door. She had previously filled up the bathtub with water, and then had some knives, scissors, there were firearms in the closet, and the idea, we think that she was going to harm herself while the house burned. The house never really caught. The fuel burned off, created some really nasty heat, and enough heat was generated to kind of come down and melt some of the pleather on a sofa and a armoire and some wood shelves and a few other things, but it never really got the house going. It kind of self-extinguished. As a matter of fact, fire never put a lick of water on the place. It basically put itself out because it didn't have enough energy and oxygen to keep going. When PD had shown up and they were knocking on the windows, it scared her and she got frightened. They're not sure she broke the window and jumped through it or jumped through it, but she had multiple deep lacerations on her body. She was taken to the hospital on 5150, which is a medical hold for evaluation. I never got the chance to talk to her after taking a look at the house and taking samples of the evidence. The hospital had released her early without notifying PD, and she had left the area and went to a reservation. Because she was able to be on the reservation, and I have no authority, and local PD has no authority on the reservation, the investigation pretty much stopped there. And it wasn't an investigation because pretty much we know it's arson. She's the only one there. She did it. This was more of how do we get somebody the help they need. But we couldn't do anything with it. So I collected all this data, and I had this weird haunted house fire investigation. Ultimately, a year later, she had contacted the local authorities, said, "Hey, I want to come in and talk." She came in and talked about what had happened, and they got her some help, and it all worked out. There were no charges. But that was a very, very strange walkthrough. I've had cases that are currently pending, so I can't talk too much about them, but I had a gentleman light his bedroom on fire and jump out the second floor window after he changed his mind. I've had Wi-Fi enabled devices remotely started that were hooked to heat sources to ignite a house from another state away. I've been on car accidents that started wildland fires. It turned out that the person in the vehicle ultimately was determined had a heart attack and crashed the car and caused the fire, as opposed to some other murder scene. I've been on homicides that there were some very clear indicators that this was not self-inflicted. And so just the science behind how these cases work, and when you're dealing with the fatal and the body, and the things that are there, is something as simple for, is there soot in the lungs? If there's soot in the lungs, they were breathing at the time, a good chance that they were either conscious or at least alive. If there's no soot, it takes you down a very different path. Where are the burns? Is there any part of their body that's protected? Because fire works from the outside in. It doesn't burn everything. So if I have a fatal fire and I roll somebody over and they have clothing and hair or skin on their back, I know that they were in this position prior to the fire, or at least during the fire. I've done some case studies where it looked like a suicide, and it looked like somebody had been, it turned out to be a suicide, but it looked like from the outside that somebody had grabbed somebody and hurt them and done this to a person, but ultimately digging through the evidence and coming to find out that, yeah, those were self-inflicted wounds, and we're talking about perspective. Perspective is very interesting. If you spend any time interviewing witnesses, there's a lot of different tacks you have to take to get to the root of the story, because how I perceive something and you perceive something is so drastically different. Good example, if the neighbor calls 911 because he sees 8-foot flames through the window across the street, that's initial intel that I'll take. But when I get there and I see that the fire is actually on top of the table in the kitchen, which already brings it 3 feet off the ground, it's a different story. So, just it's hard. You have to be careful not to get total buy-in from all of the evidence, but look at it in its totality and not focus on one thing. I've been on fires and learned lessons where I focused on one thing and thought for sure that this is intentional, or thought for sure this is accidental. And based on more information or some time passing or more education and learning, realize, oh, what I was looking at is this. Actually, it's a very different outcome. So always learning. Any detective, whether your discipline is fire or homicide or car accident reconstruction, you have to be a constant learner, because when they say no two are the same, no two are the same. And if you silo your education with just one class or one bit and you continue to use that for years, you can't do it. The science is changing so quickly, and you have to be up on it. So.
You had mentioned that you currently do interviews for prospective firemen. Mm-hmm. So just a couple quick last questions for you. So recently I've been seeing a billboard up, and I don't know if you've seen this. It's like Spokane Valley Fire is looking for good firemen. I would assume, just even going back to the very beginning of your career, where you're talking about becoming a fireman is super competitive. I'm wondering why. Well, two things. First of all, I'm wondering why Spokane, and not necessarily Spokane in general, but why would a fire department be out there recruiting when you'd think you'd have a line of 100, 200 people? And then my last question for you, because again, I'm assuming that everybody wants to work 2 days a month and have barbecues and be a fireman. What recommendations do you have for somebody who wants to become a fireman?
I'll ignore those shots fired. Okay. So, don't be mad you got on the wrong line or made bad choices.
I told you I don't like fire. That's
So, to your first question, with places like Spokane or places that put up billboards or seem like they have to advertise a lot and don't get a lot of turnout, I think that's the density of the population. The culture, when you move around, and that was one of the things that was great for working with the state, just moving up and down the state. The culture in areas is extremely different from one place to another. Uh, in a place like Southern California, it's a dense culture, and you have thousands and thousands of people who want to be firefighters. Whereas if I'm going to go up to a place like Yellow Pine in Idaho, or I'm going to go up to McCall, or I'm going to go to some of these smaller places that maybe don't have the travel, it's a necessity. You need the local, whether they're volunteers, auxiliary, or a combination. The people there are doing it because it's their community, they're protecting themselves, they also have other jobs, and when the bell rings, they got to go to the station, get the equipment, then respond to help. When you're in a more municipal area or a metropolitan area, and you have more people, those jobs are fewer and far between, and I would say that the drive to do those jobs is also different to some degree. So I can't speak for the particulars at Spokane, but there are places that it is very difficult because maybe they can't meet the pay of the local economy. There are very few places actually where it meets the local economy. Like even in where I'm working now, it is a challenge to be able to start as a first year, second year, third year firefighter and be able to make enough to own a house or support a family. I've heard stories of New York where your entry level firefighters are on food stamps. Um, there's also the other end where you can go to some more densely populated areas, Southern California areas, where if you are able to get in there, your entry level firefighter can make over 100,000 a year. So it really depends on the geographical location that you're in based on why you might see billboards saying, hey, we need help, versus I don't even have to advertise because I got 10 people standing outside and I don't have any spots for them.
not joking, but literally just I want to follow up on what you were just talking about, cost of living and having a fireman be able to live on a salary. I mean, is it common for, because I always hear this, but is it common for firemen to have second jobs and not just for beginning, just to make ends meet? I don't know if that's true, but maybe even as a senior fireman having, side jobs. Is that common?
I think it is, and it could be a number of factors, right? It can be, a lifestyle that somebody's trying to live. I would say there are areas where you are trying to keep up with the Joneses, right? I have to have the big truck and the RV and the Sea-Doos, and I have to lead this life that might reflect what is common for that area. Most of the time, fire and police, although extremely important, it's like insurance. It's there if I need it, but otherwise, I don't want to pay more to make sure you can do it. And public perception is also very difficult. So, for an example, an officer usually works on their own. They sit in their own car. There's an area they sit in or a few that they frequent. But when you see two black and whites having a meeting, two cop cars sitting next to each other because both driver's side and they're chatting in a parking lot, the comments will come back, well, they're not doing anything. What are you doing? As law enforcement, you know what's happening. I'm talking to my partner. We're talking about what just happened. We're meeting up for 5 minutes before I get a call. We get the same thing. A fire truck goes to the grocery store. Why does it take 4 firemen to go to the grocery store? Why didn't you just send some dude in a truck? Well, because if we get a call, that one dude might be our medic. That one dude might be the captain. We can't break up crews. And so there's a lot of public perception on how that happens. Well, not having the facts will come back. If you don't have good PR and people aren't getting answers, that when they go to vote on whether it's bonds or they go to vote for increasing city wages. The first thing they remember is, well, there was 10 of them at the grocery store not doing anything, or they sleep all day, or I've seen the recliners at the fire station, right? Why am I paying you to sleep at night? Well, these are all questions that come up all the time, and they have really good logistical answers for response. But unless somebody's willing to listen to the answers and understand, then they're going to make up their own answers.
Yeah, I never even thought about the
Right.
whole grocery store thing. I mean, that's a perfect example.
Right. I mean, so if we're talking about like the nighttime thing, why do we pay them to sleep there? Well, they're there because they wake up multiple times in the evening to respond to somebody who's not breathing. You want them coming from their house to get the equipment and then get there, or do you want them to be there?
Right.
So there's that was trying to educate the public in the kindest way possible so people understand why these processes are the way they are. Usually just a conversation will take care of them. Often there's some comeback like, well, wait a minute, why don't you work 12-hour shifts? And then they're just up all the time. Well, that's true, but now I need more people. Why don't you have less equipment? Well, now I'm putting more tires on the road, more spins, that equipment's going to get run down quicker. Why do you need X amount of this or this? So there are reasons. So in a position like mine, where we're fiscally responsible, or trying to be as fiscally responsible and having equipment that'll dual function and save money, these are questions that come up all the time. And when it comes back to a voter or somebody who is going to have a significant say so in how we spend that money or why, we have to have these justified reasons. The common person doesn't necessarily know. I know that when we've done Fill the Boot, which is we collect money for MS or different organizations, often people are like, I'm not giving the fire department any more money. Well, it's not for me. I'm standing out here for somebody else, right? So it's perception, going back to perception.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. So getting back to the first part of your question, I think it depends on the density of the population and the need as to why you might have to advertise because of that population, either the cost or the amount of people, or just the desire. Desire today is from youth today is different than desire when I was a kid.
Okay, so that's a great point. And before you answer my last question, which was recommendations you have for people to become firemen, are you seeing a difference between your recruits of 20 years ago up until now?
Again, it also comes back to geographics. Okay. But yes. So let's take local geographics. Okay. A lot of locals or local rural area, which would apply for some of the positions near us because we have a vast rural area, I'm going to get the farmer mechanics. I'm going to get the kid who came up on a farm and gets up in the morning or does hard work or was taught how to fix an engine, was taught some certain a skill set that was part of their daily life, right? Versus someone who grew up in a household where there wasn't a lot of physical labor. There were rules, but maybe I spent a lot of time doing, whether it's electronic video games or TV or something else, right? So I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I'm just comparing the realistic differences of that skill set when you become a young adult and you're looking for a job that's very hands-on. I will say that there is a big difference, but the change actually has to come from administration as opposed to trying to get somebody to change, like a new candidate. I have to understand, how do we train somebody differently that has grown up with a cell phone or an iPad in their hand almost their entire life now, when it didn't exist when I was younger? So how can I make our training accessible to somebody who is more comfortable using electronic devices as opposed to sitting and reading through a textbook, right? So I don't like to hear necessarily that, because then they start sounding like my father and his father. Kids today, they don't know how to do it, right? That's just the changing population. But as an administrator, I have to find better way. We, as administration, have to find better ways to connect with that next group and make sure that they're getting that skill set that bring them up into the expectations of what we need them to do. Now, is there less people because people are less interested in doing physical labor? I don't have statistics on that. I'd say you could probably say that's a safe bet. Um, but for the ones that are interested, there is a difference between the firefighters that are coming in today and the older people that have been there a while and how they came up. And just that integration is different too, because it's not just me understanding how to reach them and train them and make sure that we're connecting on the same level. I have to educate my captains, my battalion chiefs, my people in higher levels who have been there a while to make sure that they can integrate and have conversations with somebody who didn't learn the same way they did. They didn't learn by being told what to do. Back in the day, a good example would be when we held a fire, my experience, when there was a fire academy, we brought people in to weed them out. You were not treated kindly. It was loud. It was in your face. It was pro-military. It was get down, do this, how many push-ups. It was punishment and chaos so you could learn how to operate in chaos. That doesn't work today. When I have an academy now, I'm not bringing you into academy to weed you out. I've already done that in the process. I'm here to lift you up and make sure that I give you the skill set to achieve goals, not weed out the weak from the strong. So it's a different mindset, and it has to be because it's the right way to move forward. We're just more stringent in the oral interview or the written interview process to make sure we're getting candidates. And then if I'm going to invest thousands of dollars in your gear and your training, why would I invest all of that money just to kick you out? I want to invest in you to be better. And what I tell candidates now is that when I'm hiring firefighters, which I have the privilege to do, which is probably one of the best parts of my job currently, is hiring that next level. I could throw a rock outside and hit somebody who wants to be a firefighter these days. That's no big deal. But I'm not looking for the next person. I'm looking for the next chief. So when I'm hiring them, I'm looking for the next chief, somebody to replace me. 10, 15, 20 years, I want that person to be able to sit in these chairs and make these decisions. I don't want just anybody off the street, right? So I'm looking for leadership skills. I'm looking for a background in any type of business because at this end, even at the battalion level, which oversees several stations, you still have to be good at handling people and business, programs, policies. It's even way before my time, the day of just getting in and kind of getting promoted because you were the last one standing or you've been there 20 years, that doesn't work. So we intentionally are looking for people who can fill these roles. And to answer your last part of your question about what can you do, anytime you can have a background, whether locally you're at CWI or you have Forest Service experience or any type of fire experience, that's going to be great. If you have a degree in anything, it could be basket weaving, it could be sports, I don't care what it is. A degree shows that you can be taught and you have the discipline to work through it, whether it was online or in class. Super good with that. An example is last go around, I hired a guy with no fire experience, but he was the head of distribution for a wine company, and he would travel and he would make sales, and then he would coordinate logistically with all of those sales. And that's somebody who has leadership potential. That's somebody who has a drive. He's also trying to do something new and change the trajectory of his life. He wants a different career. So all of those things make him a good candidate. Military. Look for military background. You came from something that's most likely very strict and there's order to it. We're a pro-military organization, so I do like that. So that command structure is built in. But again, what have you done since then? You got out of the military. Are you coming right? Are you still active? Was it 10 years ago and you haven't been doing anything since? Have you been going to college? So we look at all those things. So I guess the crux of what I'm saying is that it doesn't really matter what you have in your background, as long as you can show that you are a continued learner and that you are continually trying to do something to get to where you want to be with your goals. But I don't necessarily need you to have a fire background. We'll teach you all of that. We'll put you through the academy, and you'll find out real quick whether it's something you can do or not. But yeah, the minimum hiring requirements are EMT and high school education or GED. Everything on top of that is fluff. It's how do you build your personal resume so when you sit across the table, this is what I've been doing, this is my goal, and I'm not stopping at firefighter. My dream and desire is to a couple of years, 10 years from now, I want to be captain, I want to be a battalion, I'm interested in being a training officer, I want to be chief in 15 to 20 years. Yeah. Having that outlook when you come in, I like to hear that. And I like to see that your resume and education are heading that direction. Because if I should be I should be training my replacement, for 10 years before I go. So I want everybody to know everybody's job and have that desire and opportunity to move up. So that's what I look for. It might be a little different than the average firefighter. I know our guys, I'll say our guys in general, being younger and sitting in panels and hearing stories and having lots of friends and family that have been through processes like this, you're depending on your marching orders from your agency and what you're looking for could be very different. I'll tell you that I look for the education, but the chief next to me or the firefighter next to me, he might be looking for something completely different. I'd say the best thing you can do is not have gaps in education and not have gaps in employment, and always show that you're moving forward. You had hit on something earlier, is it normal for firefighters to have multiple jobs? The work schedule does allow, Caldwell works 2 on, 4 off. Other agencies work Kelly schedules where they're on, off, on, off, on, off for 4. And so very messed up, kind of crazy schedules. But when you work 10 days a month, you can find some other things to do. And a lot of time it's maybe not out of necessity, but out of hobby. I will tell you, up until 3 years ago when I started with Caldwell, I have never had less than 2 to 3 jobs. Even working at the state as a fire investigator, Monday through Friday, the state doesn't pay what would be reasonable for me to raise my family, so it was a necessity. But I've always had multiple jobs. I've always had multiple jobs. Even with Ventura, I wasn't teaching after hours. I wasn't doing something else. I did lots and lots of jobs based on my lifestyle. My lifestyle was all about my kids. My wife wanted to stay at home. We wanted to raise our kids, so we made sacrifices. I didn't have the RV and the boats and the big things. I worked 3 and 4 jobs to make sure that we had the things we needed so she could stay home, right? And then as they got older, I thought for sure it'd be great, but you know what? The things got more expensive and their needs became more. And then we move into college and things like that. So, the average firefighter schedule allows quite a bit of time off, and to fill that with another job or a hobby is very, very common, depending on your lifestyle. Yeah.
Alan, thank you very much for the interview.
Of course. You're very
Appreciate
welcome.
it.